Chapter 1. The Librarian Who Fell into a Novel. The bookshelf did not fall gracefully. Lin Chong's last memory was a cascade of hardcovers, the sharp corner of an encyclopedia striking his temple, and the absurd thought, I haven't finished cataloging the 19th century poetry section. He was 32 years old, a senior librarian at the Jiangnan Municipal Library, and he had spent his entire adult life surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and the gentle scent of aging paper. His world was orderly, predictable, and blissfully silent. He had no enemies, no lovers, and no outstanding debts. He was, by all measures, a man who had arranged his life with the same meticulous precision he applied to the Dewey Decimal System. Death, he reflected, was far less organized. When he opened his eyes, the ceiling was wrong. It was not the familiar white tile of the library ceiling, but dark, carved wood, lacquered to a deep mahogany sheen. Silk drapes hung from a four-poster bed. The air smelled of sandalwood and something metallic, blood, perhaps, or the distant smoke of forges. A young man in flowing robes rushed to his side. Your Highness, thank the ancestors, you've been unconscious for 3 days. The court physicians feared the fever would take you. Lin Chong stared at the stranger, then at his own hands. They were not his hands. They were slender, pale, unblemished, the hands of someone who had never lifted a box of returns or jammed a jammed microfilm reader. He touched his face. It was soft, smooth, entirely unfamiliar. Who? He managed, his voice a delicate tenor unlike his own. Am I? The servant's face crumpled with pity. Oh, Your Highness, the fever has stolen your memory. You are Prince Lin Rue of Hui, the favored son of the Western Palace. And tomorrow, the servant's voice dropped to a whisper, thick with dread. Tomorrow, you depart as hostage to the Barbarian king. The words hit Lin Chong like a second encyclopedia to the skull. Lin Rue, Prince of Hui, war hostage. He remembered, dimly, a historical novel a patron had returned last year. Something about a doomed prince sent north, a barbarian king, a tragic end. He hadn't read it. He'd been too busy processing the backlog. But the title came back to him now, unbidden, iron and silk. He was inside a novel. And if the vague synopsis he recalled was correct, Prince Lin Rue did not survive Chapter 10. The journey north took 3 weeks. Lin Chong, now Lin Rue, rode in a gilded cage of a carriage, surrounded by a contingent of Hui soldiers who regarded him with poorly disguised contempt. He was the beauty prince, they whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. A useless ornament, a son whose only value was his face, traded to the barbarians to buy a fragile peace. Lin Rue found he didn't much care what they thought. He was too busy trying to remember every detail of the novel he'd never read, cataloging his own memories like the books he'd left behind. He remembered that the barbarian king, Lei Tai, was called the Iron Thunder. He remembered that the Northern Kingdom was called the Yin Plains Federation. He remembered that Prince Lin Rue was supposed to be assassinated, or perhaps assassinate someone, but the specifics were lost to him. What he remembered most vividly was the library. The novel, he recalled, had mentioned something about the barbarians hoarding the spoils of conquered kingdoms. Manuscripts, scrolls, codices, all piled in some forgotten chamber, left to rot. He had skimmed that passage with professional horror, thinking what a waste it was. Now, as the carriage rattled through the northern passes and the air grew thin and cold, that memory became an anchor. He would not weep. He would not plead. He would find that archive, and he would make it right. It was a ridiculous plan. It was the only plan he had. The throne room of the Yin Plains Federation was nothing like the delicate halls of Hui. It was built of rough-hewn stone and massive timbers, hung with the pelts of wolves and bears. Fires roared in iron braziers, casting dancing shadows across the faces of hardened warriors. At the far end, on a throne carved from the skull of some enormous beast, sat the man himself. King Lei Tai was not what Lin Rue expected. He had imagined a brute, a hulking, slobbering monster with a club and a loincloth. Instead, the man who rose from the throne was tall, certainly, and broad-shouldered, with a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, twisting his mouth into a perpetual half-sneer. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and utterly, unervingly focused. His black hair was pulled back in a warrior's knot, threaded with beads of bone and bronze. He wore leather and fur, but the craftsmanship was exquisite, a king's raiment, not a savage's. When his gaze fell on Lin Rue, it was like being pinned by a spear. The Hui delegation prostrated themselves. The chief minister launched into a speech of humility and submission, his voice trembling. Lin Rue, as protocol demanded, knelt, but he did not bow his head. He was looking past the throne. Through a doorway, half hidden by a heavy tapestry, he saw them. Stacks, piles, mountains of scrolls, books, tablets, and loose pages spilling out of a chamber like the contents of a library that had vomited. He saw paper curling with damp, leather bindings cracked and peeling, ink bleeding into illegibility. He saw, with the trained eye of a man who had spent 15 years preserving the written word, a catastrophe. He forgot to be afraid. The chief minister finished his groveling. Silence fell. All eyes turned to the hostage prince, waiting for the expected performance. Tears, pleas, perhaps a dignified speech about mercy. Leitai descended from his throne, his boots thudding against the stone floor with deliberate, menacing slowness. He stopped before Lin Rue, towering over him, and reached down. His hand was rough, calloused, warm. He gripped Lin Rue's chin, tilting his face up to the torchlight. The court held its breath. This was the moment of judgment. Would the beauty prince weep? Would he faint? Would he curse his captor? Lin Rue met the king's eyes. His mind, still half occupied with the archival horror behind the throne, produced the only words it could. "Your collection," he said, his voice steady despite the iron grip on his jaw. "It's deteriorating. The humidity alone is criminal." The silence that followed was absolute. Leitai stared at him. The scarred half of his face did not move, but the other side, the side with the eye that had not gone cold with war, flickered. Something shifted behind that sharp gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. Then the barbarian king laughed. It was a harsh, rusty sound, as if laughter was a language he had once spoken but long forgotten. It echoed off the stone walls, startling the warriors, making the Hui ministers tremble. His grip on Lin Rue's jaw softened, his thumb inadvertently brushing against the prince's lower lip, a touch that was neither threat nor tenderness, but something in between. "Humidity," Leitai repeated, as if tasting the word. He released Lin Rue's face, but did not step back. Their faces were close now, close enough that Lin Rue could see the faint lines at the corners of those sharp eyes. "You are a hostage. I could have your head on a pike by sundown. And you speak to me of humidity." Lin Rue swallowed. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but 15 years of dealing with patrons who tried to eat near rare manuscripts had given him a certain kind of courage. With respect, he said, "If you're going to kill me, I'd rather die having said it. Those scrolls are irreplaceable. Do you have any idea what you're letting rot back there?" Leitai's laughter faded, but the expression that replaced it was not anger. It was curiosity, a slow, dangerous kindling behind his eyes. He stepped back, looking at Lin Rue as if seeing him for the first time. "Bring him to the archive," the king said to no one in particular. "Let him see his criminal humidity up close." He turned and walked back to his throne, but before he sat, he glanced over his shoulder. "And find him better quarters. He's useless to me if he catches lung fever before I decide what to do with him." As Lin Rue was led away, his legs trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline, he caught the king's gaze one last time. Leitai was watching him with an intensity that had nothing to do with politics or ransom. It was the look of a man who had found something unexpected, something he wanted to understand. Lin Rue did not know it yet, but his life as a librarian had just ended. Something new was beginning. Chapter 2. The Archivist's Sanctum. The archive was worse than he had imagined. Lin Rue stood in the doorway of the so-called trophy chamber the following morning, and for a long, terrible moment, he could not breathe. Not from fear, from sheer, unadulterated horror. The chamber was vast, easily the size of the main reading room at Jiangnan Municipal. But unlike his carefully organized domain, this was chaos made manifest. Scrolls lay in drifts like autumn leaves, their silk ribbons frayed, their wooden dowels cracked. Codices were stacked haphazardly against the walls, some with their spines facing inward, others upside down. Clay tablets from some ancient civilization served as doorstops. Loose pages, illuminated manuscripts, official seals, diplomatic correspondence had escaped their bindings and scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. And everywhere was the enemy, dust, damp, and neglect. "Impressive, isn't it?" said the guard assigned to him, a young warrior named Badu, who seemed more amused than intimidated by the hostage prince. "Every kingdom my king has conquered, he brings back their treasures. Gold, jewels, weapons, and this." He gestured vaguely at the mess. "No one knows what to do with it. Most of it's been sitting here for years." Lin Rue walked slowly into the chamber, his soft slippers. He had refused the ornate boots the Hui ministers had packed, making no sound on the stone floor. He knelt beside a pile of scrolls, his fingers trembling as he touched the nearest one. The paper was brittle, flaking at the edges. He unrolled it carefully, holding his breath. Han Dynasty records, census data, administrative reports, poetry fragments. Hundreds of years old, preserved through wars and dynasties, only to die here, in the dark, forgotten by conquerors who saw no value in the written word. He felt tears prick his eyes, not the tears of a frightened prince, but the tears of a librarian who had just witnessed the death of 1,000 stories. "You," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Bada straightened, hand going to his sword. "What?" Lin Rue stood, dusting off his robes. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "I need to speak with your king." He found Lei Tai in the training yard, stripped to the waist despite the northern chill, swinging a massive greatsword at a wooden post. Sweat gleamed on the scarred landscape of his back, the muscles shifting like coiled steel beneath his skin. Lin Rue had seen fit men before. The library had its share of attractive patrons, but something about the raw, unapologetic physicality of the barbarian king made his throat go dry. He pushed the feeling aside and stepped forward. "I have a request," he announced. Lei Tai did not stop his practice. The greatsword whistled through the air, embedding itself in the post with a crack that made Lin Rue flinch. "Hostages do not make requests. I'm making one anyway." They made the king pause. He turned, pulling the sword free and resting it against his shoulder. Sweat traced paths down his chest, and Lin Rue very deliberately did not look. "You are an unusual hostage," Lei Tai observed. "Speak. I want to organize the archive." A beat of silence. Then Lei Tai laughed again, that rusty, disbelieving sound. "You want to organize the pile of old paper." "It's not just old paper," Lin Rue said, his voice sharp. "It's the complete administrative records of the Jin dynasty. It's the only surviving copy of the Northern Campaign Chronicles. It's illuminated manuscripts from the Western Academy, which was burned during the invasion of Chang'an. He stopped himself, took a breath. "It's history, and it's dying." Lei Tai studied him, the greatsword still resting against his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had shifted. "And why should I let my hostage bury himself in old scrolls instead of weeping for his homeland like a proper prince?" "Because," Lin Rue said, "if you want a weeping hostage, I'm a terrible choice. I don't weep. I organize, and I'm very good at it." He met the king's gaze without flinching. He had faced worse than this. He had once mediated a dispute between two elderly patrons fighting over the last copy of a romance novel. Compared to that, a barbarian king was nothing. Lei Tai's mouth twitched. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "You are either very brave or very stupid." "I'm a librarian," Lin Rue said. "It's often the same thing." The king considered him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine, you may play with your paper. But one wrong move, one attempt at escape or sabotage, and I'll feed you to my wolves." He paused. "I mean that literally. I have wolves." "I don't doubt it," Lin Rue said. "I'll need supplies. Brushes, ink, rice paste for repairs, silk thread for rebinding, and... Leitai held up a hand. Batu. The young guard stepped forward. Get him whatever he needs. And keep an eye on him. He looked back at Lin Rue, something unreadable in his expression. This should be entertaining, if nothing else. What followed was, by any measure, the most blissful 3 weeks of Lin Rue's life, both lives included. He moved into the archive. His assigned quarters were luxurious by northern standards. Fur-lined bed, silk hangings, a brazier that kept the room warm through the frigid nights. But they were a 10-minute walk from the archive, and every minute away from the deteriorating scrolls felt like a betrayal. So he petitioned again. This time, his request was more unconventional. Permission to move his bed into the archive itself. You want to sleep among the old paper, Leitai said flatly when Badu delivered the message. He was in his war room, maps spread across a massive table, his generals arguing about supply lines and troop movements. He looked up from the maps, expression caught between irritation and fascination. It's not old paper, Badu reported, echoing the prince's words. He said it's, and I quote, a sacred trust from history that must be preserved before the damp claims it forever. He also said he would accept a cot. He's not particular. One of the generals snorted. The southern prince has lost his mind. Leitai ignored him. He was remembering the way the hostage had looked in the archive, the passion in his voice, the trembling hands that had touched the scrolls with more reverence than some men touched their lovers. It was absurd. It was inexplicable. It was compelling. Let him have his cot, Leitai said, and give him more firewood. If the damp is the enemy, we won't let it win. Badu blinked. My king, we're at war with 3 neighboring tribes. You're allocating resources to my hostage, Leitai said, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice, who is currently more useful cataloging old paper than any of you have been in a council meeting. Get him his firewood. Badu bowed and left. The generals exchanged glances, but wisely said nothing. That night, unable to sleep, Leitai found himself walking toward the archive. He told himself it was a security check. The hostage had been given too much freedom, too many supplies. It was prudent to ensure he wasn't plotting escape or constructing weapons from scroll dowels. The archive was quiet when he entered, the only light coming from a single candle at the far end. The chaos he remembered had been transformed, not entirely, but noticeably. Scrolls were now sorted into rough piles by region. The loose pages had been gathered into boxes improvised from wooden crates. A makeshift table had been constructed from 2 barrels and a door, and on it lay an array of brushes, pots of ink, and strips of silk for repairs. And there, at the center of it all, was the hostage prince. Lin Rue was asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms, a scroll half unrolled beneath his cheek. His robes were rumpled, ink stained his fingers, and there was a smear of rice paste on his forehead. He looked nothing like the pristine, perfumed prince who had been presented in the throne room 3 weeks ago. He looked, Leitai thought, with something that might have been wonder, like a man exactly where he belonged. The king stood in the shadows, watching the hostage breathe. The candlelight softened the delicate features, turned the pale skin to gold. There was a peace in Lin Rue's sleeping face that Leitai had never seen in any captive, or any free man, for that matter. He moved closer, his boots silent on the stone. He had learned to move quietly in a world where silence meant survival. The cot Lin Rue had requested was against the far wall, a thin mattress with a single blanket. In a northern cold, it was barely adequate. Leitai looked at the cot, looked at the sleeping prince, and did something he had not done for any other hostage, any other person, in years. He removed his own fur cloak, wolf pelt, thick and warm, a gift from his father before the old king died, and draped it over the sleeping scholar. Lin Rue stirred, murmuring something unintelligible about acid-free paper, but did not wake. The fur settled around his shoulders, and his shivering ceased. Leitai stood there for a long time, longer than was wise or necessary. He watched the rise and fall of the prince's breathing, the way the candlelight caught the curve of his cheek, the dark sweep of his lashes against pale skin. He felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire or battle rage. It was unfamiliar. It was unwelcome. He left before Lin Rue could wake, moving through the darkness like the ghost he had become in a dozen campaigns. But he did not forget the image of the hostage prince, wrapped in a barbarian king's cloak, sleeping peacefully among the old paper. Chapter 3. The King's First Shushing. A week passed, then another. Lin Rue lost himself in the work with an absorption that surprised even him. He cataloged, organized, repaired, and cataloged some more. He created a rough classification system based on dynasty and subject matter. He began a handwritten inventory, filling scroll after scroll with meticulous notes. He taught himself to make rice paste from scratch when the supplies ran low. He experimented with different binding techniques, trying to salvage codices whose spines had cracked and crumbled. He was, for the first time in either of his lives, perfectly, utterly content. The guards who rotated through the archive grew accustomed to him. They brought him meals, which he ate without tasting. They reported to the king that the prince did nothing but work, muttering to himself about proper storage conditions and archival standards. Leitai received these reports with an expression that his generals had learned to recognize, the look of a predator who has found something worth stalking. On the 18th day, the king came to the archive. He came deliberately, without the stealth he had used on his previous visit. His boots thundered on the stone floor. His armor clanked with the weight of his presence. He was there to intimidate, to remind his strange hostage that captivity was still captivity, no matter how many scrolls he got to play with. The effect was somewhat diminished by the soft-soled slippers Lin Rue now wore. Lin Rue was waist-deep in a pile of Han Dynasty records, cross-referencing a fragment of census data with a tax register he had uncovered the previous day. He did not look up when the king entered. He had learned, over the past weeks, to tune out the comings and goings of guards, servants, and curious warriors who wandered in to gawk at the mad southern prince. Leitai's boots squeaked. It was a minor thing, a slight give in the leather, a whisper of sound against the stone. But in the profound silence of the archive, it was deafening. Lin Rue's hand, holding a brush, stopped moving. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge the king's presence with the bow or trembling submission that protocol demanded. Instead, he raised his other hand, extending a single finger in the universal gesture for silence. Leitai stopped, not because he was commanded, he was the king, and no one commanded him, but because the sheer audacity of it froze him in place. Lin Rue finished writing his note, set down his brush, and only then looked up. His expression was not angry, exactly, nor frightened. It was the look of a man who had been interrupted in the middle of something important and was not pleased about it. His voice, when he spoke, was a razor-sharp whisper that cut through the silence like a blade. Your boots are squeaking, and the dust from your furs is settling on the Han Dynasty records. If you aren't here to donate a book, please leave. The silence that followed was absolute. Badu, standing in the doorway, turned pale. He had seen his king kill men for far less than being shushed. He reached for his sword, ready to defend the mad prince from his own folly. But Leitai did not move to strike. He stood in the center of the archive, the fearsome Iron Thunder, conqueror of 23 tribes, staring at the hostage prince who had just told him to be quiet. And then he looked at the silence sign. It was a new edition, hung on the door, a piece of torn map, the painted characters still fresh. Lin Rue had made it that morning, after a particularly chatty guard had interrupted his cataloging 3 times in 1 hour. Leitai read the characters slowly. He had learned to read as a boy, before the wars had consumed his youth, and he had not forgotten. Please maintain silence. Respect the archives. He looked back at Lin Rue, who had already returned to his work. The Han Dynasty records spread before him like a shield. The prince's hand was steady on the brush, but there was a tension in his shoulders that betrayed his awareness of the king's gaze. And Leitai smiled. It was not the smile of a conqueror, nor the cruel smile of a captor amusing himself with a hostage's fear. It was something rarer, something he had not felt in years, genuine, unguarded delight. He left without a word, his boots deliberately silent as he walked. He did not want to disturb the archives. The next morning, a gift arrived at the archive door. Bata delivered it, his expression a mixture of confusion and awe. It was a pair of boots, but not the heavy, fur-lined boots of a northern warrior. These were soft-soled, made of supple leather, designed to make no sound on stone. Beside them was a folded note, the characters written in an unsteady hand that suggested a scribe had taken dictation. For the archive. Stop complaining. Lin Rue stared at the gift for a long time. His cheeks were warm. His heart was doing something strange and fluttery in his chest. In his past life, he had spent years making quiet suggestions to library administrators about better lighting, better shelving, better anything. His suggestions had been politely noted and politely ignored. No one had ever listened to his complaints about the proper care of rare manuscripts. No one had ever cared. And now a barbarian king, a man who conquered nations for sport, who was supposed to be the villain of this story, had listened, had remembered, had gone out of his way to accommodate a hostage's petty preferences. Lin Rue sat down heavily on his cot, the boots clutched to his chest, and wondered when exactly his life had become a romance novel. Chapter 4. A Campaign for Manuscripts. The kingdom of Lulan made a mistake. It was a minor thing, a trade dispute, a diplomatic slight, a misunderstanding about tribute payments. In any other year, Leitai would have ignored it. Lulan was small, insignificant, a trading post masquerading as a kingdom. It was not worth the expense of campaign. But Lulan had something no one else had, an academy. The Lulan Academy of Letters was famous throughout the region, though its fame had faded in recent decades. Once, it had been the premier institution of learning in the north, attracting scholars from a dozen kingdoms. Its library was said to contain treasures beyond price, the complete works of the sand dune poets, illuminated manuscripts of the Epic of the Northern Star, treatises on astronomy and medicine that existed nowhere else. Lin Rue had mentioned it once, in passing, during one of their evening lessons. The lessons had become a habit, Leitai claiming he wanted to ensure his hostage wasn't plotting treason, Lin Rue pretending to believe him. They met in the archive after the day's work was done, and Lin Rue read to the king from the scrolls he was cataloging. Sometimes it was poetry, sometimes history, sometimes the dry administrative records that made Leitai's eyes glaze over. Lin Rue had learned to read the king's moods, to choose texts that would interest him. The war chronicles of the Jin dynasty, the tactical treatises from the Northern Way, the epic sagas of the steppe tribes that had roamed these lands before the Yen Federation was born. And one night, when the fire was low and the candlelight made the prince's eyes gleam like dark water, Lin Rue had spoken of Lulan. They have the songs of the sand dunes, he said, his voice soft with longing. The complete collection. There are only 3 copies known to exist, and one is here, fragmentary, damaged, missing half the verses. But the Lulan copy is said to be pristine, illuminated with gold leaf, bound in silk. I've dreamed of seeing it. He had not meant to say dreamed. It was too intimate, too revealing. He had looked away, embarrassed, and Leitai had said nothing. But the king had remembered. The campaign against Lulan lasted 3 weeks. Leitai's generals were baffled. Lulan was no threat, offered no strategic advantage, and would cost more to conquer than it would yield in tribute. They argued against it, citing the ongoing conflicts with the eastern tribes, the need to consolidate their recent gains. Leitai listened to their arguments with the patience of a man who had already made up his mind. Lulan has something I want, he said when they were finished. Something worth more than gold. He did not elaborate. The generals exchanged confused glances, but did not press. When the Iron Thunder had that look in his eyes, it was best to obey. The campaign was swift and brutal, Leitai's specialty. Lulan's army was small, its walls old, its will to fight weak. Within 2 weeks, the capital had fallen. Within 3, the king of Lulan had signed a surrender, and the kingdom was absorbed into the Yen Federation. But Leitai did not return immediately. He spent an extra 3 days in Lulan, searching the academy's library, personally selecting the spoils he would bring home. His soldiers loaded wagons with gold and silver, as expected. But they also loaded crates of scrolls, boxes of codices, bundles of manuscripts bound in silk and leather. The warriors grumbled but obeyed. Their king had gone mad. They whispered, but he was still their king. Lin Rue was in the archive when the king returned. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of a victorious campaign, the sounds of celebration echoing from the great hall. He had not been invited. He was still officially a hostage. The king's strange fascination with him did not grant him access to victory feasts. He was trying to focus on a particularly difficult repair, a Jin Dynasty scroll that had been torn in 3 places, but his hands were trembling and he could not seem to make the rice paste stick. He conquered Lulan, he thought. He conquered a kingdom because I mentioned their library. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was... The archive door opened. Lin Rue looked up, and his heart stopped. Leitai stood in the doorway, still in his campaign armor, dust and dried blood on his boots. He looked exhausted, his scarred face drawn with fatigue, his eyes shadowed. But in his arms, he carried a wooden chest, carved, ornate, clearly precious. He walked to the center of the archive, laid the chest on Lin Rue's work table, and opened it. Inside, nestled in silk padding, were scrolls. Dozens of them. Their silk ribbons were intact, their wooden dowels polished smooth. The seals on the first scroll gleamed with gold leaf, the characters elegant and precise. Lin Rue's hands went to his mouth. He knew, before he even touched them, what they were. The songs of the sand dunes, he breathed. Leitai nodded, a surprisingly boyish gesture. Complete. I had their librarians check. Every verse, every commentary, every illumination. It's all there. Lin Rue reached out, his fingers hovering over the scrolls, afraid to touch them, afraid they might vanish like a dream. You conquered a kingdom for poetry scrolls. It wasn't just the poetry, Leitai said. Their academy had other things. Medical texts, astronomical charts, a treatise on irrigation that your agricultural records say we need. He shrugged, as if conquering a kingdom was no more significant than running an errand. But the poetry was the main thing. Lin Rue looked up at the king, the scarred, bloodied, exhausted king who had gone to war for a librarian's wistful comment. Something cracked open in his chest, something he had been carefully, meticulously containing since he arrived in this world. You are insane, he whispered. Leitai's mouth curved into that rare, unguarded smile. So I've been told. Lin Rue did not think. He moved before his mind could catch up with his body, stepping forward and rising on his toes to press his lips against the king's scarred cheek. It was brief, a brush of skin, a whisper of warmth. But the contact sent electricity through him, and he stepped back immediately, his face burning, his heart hammering. I'm sorry, he stammered, the words tumbling out. That was professional gratitude. I mean, it wasn't. I'm not. The scrolls are... Leitai caught his wrist. His grip was gentle, nothing like the iron hold of the throne room. His thumb pressed against Lin Rue's pulse point, feeling the frantic beat there. His eyes were dark, intense, focused entirely on the flustered prince before him. Do that again, Leitai said, his voice low, rough with an emotion that made Lin Rue's knees weak. And I'll conquer another one. It was not a threat. It was a promise. Chapter 5. The Language of Scrolls and Swords. After Lulan, everything changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the way the guards looked at him, a warmth in the servants' greetings that had not been there before. Lin Rue was no longer a hostage to be watched. He was the king's something. No one had a word for it yet, but everyone felt it. The archive became the center of the fortress's social life. Warriors came to gawk at the southern prince who had tamed their king, and stayed to listen to him read from the scrolls he was cataloging. Lin Rue found himself giving impromptu lectures on history, philosophy, the proper way to store parchment. He taught the illiterate guards to recognize their names in writing. He showed the cooks how to make rice paste for repairs, which they promptly adapted into a popular noodle dish. And every evening, when the work was done, Leitai came. They had established a routine. The king would arrive, remove his boots at the door, a gesture that never failed to make Lin Rue's heart flutter, and settle onto the cushions Lin Rue had arranged near the brazier. Lin Rue would choose a scroll, something he thought the king might find interesting, and read aloud. But recently, Lin Rue had begun to teach. "You should learn to read them yourself," he said one evening, setting aside the scroll he had been translating. "It's one thing to hear the words. It's another to see them." Leitai's expression was unreadable. "I know how to read. War dispatches and supply lists," Lin Rue said. "That's not the same as this." He held up the scroll, a philosophical treatise on leadership, one he thought the king might appreciate. "The characters have layers, meanings within meanings. A translator loses half the poetry." He moved to sit beside the king, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He unrolled the scroll between them, pointing to the first column of characters. "Here, the wise ruler does not conquer with force, but with understanding." The character for understanding, he traced it with his finger. "It's made of two parts. The character for knowledge and the character for heart. True understanding is not just knowing. It's feeling." He looked up to find Leitai watching him, not the scroll. The king's face was closer than Lin Rue had realized. The firelight caught the scar that twisted his mouth, turned it from something fearsome into something almost beautiful. "You love this," Leitai said. It was not a question. "Yes," Lin Rue admitted. In my old life, he stopped catching himself. He had been careful never to speak of his past, the life before this one. But something about the quiet of the archive, the warmth of the fire, the nearness of the king, made him reckless. In my old life, I had nothing but this. Books, words, stories. They were my entire world. Leitai's hand moved, covering Lin Rue's where it rested on the scroll. His palm was rough, callous from years of sword work, but his touch was gentle. "And now?" the king asked. Lin Rue looked at their hands, at the contrast between his pale, ink-stained fingers and Leitai's scarred knuckles. He thought of the life he had left behind, the quiet library, the endless cataloging, the loneliness he had mistaken for contentment. He thought of the life he had found here, in the cold northern fortress, among people who called him mad and a king who conquered kingdoms for poetry. "Now," he said softly, "my world is larger." Leitai's grip tightened just slightly. His thumb traced a circle on the back of Lin Rue's hand, and the simple touch sent heat spiraling up the prince's arm. "Teach me," the king said. "All of it. The characters, the meanings, the poetry. Teach me to see what you see." And Lin Rue did. The lessons became the centerpiece of their evenings, but they were not the only thing that grew between them. Leitai began to teach as well. Sword work at first, in exchange for the language lessons. He claimed it was practical. If Lin Rue was going to live in the north, he should know how to defend himself. Lin Rue suspected the king simply enjoyed having an excuse to touch him. They cleared a space in the archive, moving tables and scroll racks to create a makeshift training ground. Leitai had wooden swords made, sized to Lin Rue's smaller frame, and they sparred each evening before the reading began. Lin Rue was not a natural warrior. His body was soft, unaccustomed to violence. But his mind was sharp, and he had read every martial arts manual in the archive, some of them dating back centuries. He knew the theory, even if his body struggled to execute it. "You're thinking too much," Leitai said one evening, deflecting Lin Rue's wooden blade with an easy flick of his wrist. "A sword is not a book. You can't analyze your way through a fight." "I'm a librarian," Lin Rue gasped, lunging again. "Analyzing is what I do." Leitai sidestepped, caught Lin Rue's wrist, and spun him around so that the prince's back was pressed against his chest. His arm wrapped around Lin Rue's waist, holding him in place. "Then stop being a librarian," Leitai murmured against his ear, his breath warm. "For one moment. Feel." Lin Rue's heart was pounding, and it had nothing to do with the exercise. He was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, the king's chest against his back, his arm around his waist, his calloused hand covering his own on the sword hilt. "I don't know how," Lin Rue admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Leitai's grip loosened, but he did not let go. Instead, He turned Lin Rue to face him, his hands settling on the prince's waist. They were close, too close, the wooden sword forgotten between them. "Then let me teach you," the king said. "The same way you teach me to see the poetry in a character. Feel what's in front of you, not what you've read, not what you think should be there. What is?" Lin Rue looked up at him, at the scarred face, the sharp eyes, the mouth that had smiled at him like he was something precious. He thought of the scrolls he had cataloged, the stories he had preserved. None of them had prepared him for this. None of the poetry he had read had words for the way Lei Tai looked at him. He reached up, slowly, and touched the scar that ran from the king's temple to his jaw. His fingers traced the raised tissue, the old wound that had healed badly, leaving a permanent twist to that side of Lei Tai's face. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not anymore," Lei Tai said. His voice was rough. He had not moved, had not pulled away from the touch. "It's been years." "What happened?" "A blade. A battle. I was young, and I was stupid, and I thought I was invincible." He caught Lin Rue's hand, pressed it more firmly against his cheek. "The scar reminds me that I'm not." Lin Rue's thumb traced the scar's edge, featherlight. "I think it makes you beautiful." The words hung in the air between them. Lin Rue's face burned, but he did not take them back. He had spent 2 lives being careful, being quiet, being the unobtrusive librarian who never said what he meant. He was tired of it. Lei Tai's breath caught. His hands tightened on Lin Rue's waist, pulling him closer. "Say that again." Lin Rue's pulse thundered in his ears. "Beautiful," he whispered. "You're beautiful." The king kissed him. It was nothing like the brief, impulsive kiss Lin Rue had pressed to his cheek after the Lulan campaign. This was deliberate, hungry, a claiming and a question all at once. Lei Tai's mouth was warm, insistent, and Lin Rue found himself answering with a passion he had not known he possessed. His hands fisted in the king's leather tunic, pulling him closer, closer, as if he could merge their bodies through sheer will. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Lei Tai's forehead rested against Lin Rue's, his eyes closed, his hands still gripping the prince's waist. "I should have conquered Lulan sooner," the king murmured. Lin Rue laughed, breathless. "You're ridiculous." "You make me ridiculous," Lei Tai said. He opened his eyes, and the look in them made Lin Rue's knees weak. "I have conquered kingdoms, Lin Rue. I have never been conquered. Until you." Lin Rue had no answer for that. He rose on his toes and kissed the king again, because words were inadequate, and he was a librarian. He knew when words failed, touch had to speak. Chapter 6. The Feast and the First Kiss. The victory feast for the Lulan campaign was the grandest the Yin Federation had seen in years. Lin Rue sat at Lei Tai's right hand, not as a hostage, not as a curiosity, but as something the court was still struggling to name. He wore northern robes now, fur-trimmed and practical, and he met the curious stares of the warriors with the same calm composure he brought to a crumbling scroll. But the nobles were not content to stare. Lord Chun, a tribal chieftain who had allied with Lei Tai in the early days, rose halfway through the feast, his cup raised. "To the Iron Thunder, and to his guest, who has taught our king to read poetry instead of battle maps." Laughter rippled through the hall. Lord Chun pressed on, his voice slurred with drink. "Tell me, Southern Prince, do you warm the king's bed as well as his library? Or is it only old paper that excites you?" Lin Rue rose. He was not tall, not imposing, but he had the silence of the archive behind him, and he knew how to make words cut. "Lord Chun," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "in the north, you measure a man by his skill with a blade. In the south, we measure a man by his skill with words. Since you clearly lack the former, let me demonstrate the latter." The laughter faltered. "You mock what you do not understand. The scrolls in the archive contain wisdom that will outlast your name. The medical texts will heal warriors you could never best. The histories will record your drunken boasts and forget them by morning." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "But you asked if I warm the king's bed. I do not. I warm his mind. And I suspect, Lord Chun, that is something you have never managed to do for anyone." The hall erupted in laughter. This time, not at Lin Rue. Lord Chun sat down heavily, his face purple, while his own allies slapped the table in delight. Later, when the feast had dissolved into drunken singing, Lin Rue slipped out onto the balcony overlooking the northern plains. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he needed the air. Lei Tai found him there, a fur cloak in his hands. He draped it over Lin Rue's shoulders, then leaned against the railing beside him. "You didn't need to do that," the king said. "I would have silenced him." "I know, but I wanted to." Lin Rue looked out at the moonlit plains. "I'm tired of being invisible." Lei Tai turned to face him, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind his ear. "You think anyone in that hall will forget you after tonight?" Lin Rue's breath caught at the touch. "No. I suspect Lord Chun will be telling his grandchildren about the southern prince who humiliated him." "Good." Lei Tai's hand lingered on his cheek. "I want them to remember. I want them to know that you are not a hostage. You are not a trophy. You are—" He stopped, as if the words were too heavy. Lin Rue waited. "You are mine," Lei Tai said finally. "Not as a possession. As the other half of me. The part that was missing before you came." Lin Rue's throat tightened. He had cataloged 1,000 love poems, and none of them had ever made him feel like this. "In my old life," he said softly, "I was no one, a keeper of other people's stories. I never thought I would have a story of my own." Lei Tai's hand cupped his face. "Then let me help you write it. Stay. Not as a hostage. Not as a prisoner. Stay as my equal. My partner. My—" Lin Rue kissed him. It was not the brief, impulsive kiss he had given the king after Lulon. This was deliberate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Lei Tai's arms wrapped around him, pulling him close, and the fur cloak fell from Lin Rue's shoulders, but he did not feel the cold. He was warm, wrapped in the king's embrace under the northern stars. When they broke apart, Lei Tai's forehead rested against his. "You are not invisible," the king murmured. "You are the only thing I see." Lin Rue laughed, breathless. "That's a very good line. Did you learn it from the poetry scrolls?" Lei Tai smiled, that rare, unguarded smile that Lin Rue had come to treasure. "Perhaps, but I meant it." He bent to retrieve the fallen cloak, wrapping it around Lin Rue's shoulders again. Together, they watched the moon trace its path across the sky, the stars fading one by one as dawn touched the horizon. And Lin Rue, who had spent 2 lives looking for a place to belong, finally understood that he had found it. Chapter 7. The Price of Peace. The delegation from Hui arrived on a gray morning, the sky heavy with snow. Lin Rue was in the archive when Batu appeared in the doorway. "Your people are here. The king wants you in the throne room." Lin Rue set down his brush. He had known this day would come. The throne room was crowded. Lei Tai sat on his throne, expression unreadable, while 3 men in Hui silk robes knelt before him. Lin Rue recognized Lord Wei, the chief minister who had treated him with cold disdain in his former life. Lord Wei looked up when Lin Rue entered, surprise flickering across his face. The prince before him was not the soft, perfumed hostage he remembered. Lin Rue wore northern robes now, his hands calloused, his bearing confident. "Prince Lin Rue," Lord Wei said, "we have come to bring you home." Lin Rue stopped in the center of the room. He did not look at Lord Wei. He looked at Lei Tai, whose eyes were burning. "Home," Lin Rue repeated, turning to face the delegation. "You want to take me home?" Lord Wei rose. "Your father has negotiated your release. The terms are agreed upon. You are to return with us immediately." Lin Rue glanced at Lei Tai. The king gave a slight nod, confirmation that the negotiations were real. "And what?" Lin Rue said quietly. "If I do not wish to return?" Lord Wei's expression hardened. "Your Highness, you are a prince of Hui. Your duty is to your kingdom, your father, your people. Whatever comfort you have found here is temporary." Lin Rue laughed, a hollow sound. "My duty? The court that called me the beauty prince and traded me to the barbarians? The father who sent me north because I was more useful as a hostage than as a son?" He shook his head. "I have no duty to Hui, Lord Wei. I stopped being a prince the day you put me in that carriage." That night, a servant delivered a sealed letter to Lin Rue's quarters. The seal was his father's, The dragon of Hui pressed into red wax. The letter was brief, cold. It spoke of duty, of honor, of the obligations of a prince to his kingdom. And tucked into the folds of the parchment was a small glass vial. For the king, the letter read, "In his wine, 1 drop is enough. Your kingdom awaits your return." Lin Rue stared at the vial for a long time. He thought of Lei Tai's hands on his waist, his rare laugh, the way he looked at Lin Rue like he was something precious. He thought of the library he had built here, the life he had made. And he made his choice. He found Lei Tai in the archive, sitting among the scrolls like a man waiting for a sentence. Lin Rue set the letter and the vial on the table. Lei Tai read slowly, his jaw tightening. When he reached the end, he picked up the vial, holding it to the candlelight. "And you came to me," the king said quietly. "With this, I came to you." Lei Tai set the vial down. "Why? 1 drop, and you would be free. You would be a hero to your people." Lin Rue knelt before him, taking the king's face in his hands. "I would be alone. I spent my first life alone, Lei Tai. I had books, I had scrolls, but I was alone. I don't want to go back to that." He leaned close, their foreheads touching. "They see a weapon," he whispered. "My father, Lord Wei, they see a weapon they can use against you. But you see me, a person who loves old paper and silence and poetry. You see me, and I choose you." His voice broke. "I love you, Lei Tai, and I will not trade that for a kingdom." Lei Tai's arms came around him, crushing him close. "You are not a hostage," the king said fiercely. "You have never been a hostage. You are everything." He kissed Lin Rue then, not with hunger, but with relief, with wonder, with the overwhelming joy of being chosen. Lin Rue kissed him back, his hands fisted in the king's tunic, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. When they broke apart, the vial and the letter lay forgotten on the table. Lin Rue's father's poison, his old life, all of it seemed distant, unimportant. "This is my home now," Lin Rue said, his hand pressed against Lei Tai's heart. This is where I belong." Lei Tai covered his hand with his own. "Then stay. Not as a hostage. Not as a consort. Stay as my equal. My partner. He hesitated, and Lin Rue realized the iron thunder was afraid. "You're what?" Lei Tai took a breath. "My king. We rule together. The Yin Federation needs more than a warrior. It needs someone who sees beyond the next battle to the kingdom we could become. Someone like you." Lin Rue stared at him. "I'm a librarian. I catalog scrolls." "You can," Lei Tai said. "You already do. You have changed more in this kingdom in 6 months than I have in 10 years. They listen to you. They respect you. And I need you, not as a decoration, as a partner, as the other half of this kingdom." Lin Rue kissed him again, silencing the words he was not ready to hear. But when they parted, he was smiling. "I'm not saying yes. Not yet. But I'm not saying no." Lei Tai's laugh was shaky, relieved. "Then I will wait. I will conquer a dozen more kingdoms for you, if that's what it takes. Start with dealing with the Hui delegation," Lin Rue said. "Send them back. Tell them I am not for sale." And then he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the king's. "Then we can talk about ruling." Chapter 8. A New Dynasty. The Hui delegation left the next morning, their mission a failure. Lin Rue did not watch them go. He was in the archive, his hands steady, his heart light. Lei Tai sent them back with a message. Prince Lin Rue was not a hostage, not a pawn. He was the keeper of the royal archives, the first scholar of the Yin Federation, and the king's consort, equal in all things. The archive had transformed. Where once there had been chaos, now there was order. Scrolls organized by dynasty and subject. Codices repaired, their spines mended. Loose manuscripts gathered into labeled boxes. A reading area near the brazier, with cushions for scholars. And on the door, still hanging where Lin Rue had first placed it, the silent sign, now framed, preserved. Lin Rue was at his work table when Lei Tai entered, his back to the door. He wore the soft-soled slippers the king had given him months ago, and his hair was loose, falling across his shoulders. Lei Tai crossed the room silently, his own slippers making no sound, and wrapped his arms around the prince from behind. Without looking up, Lin Rue held up a single finger. Silence. I'm working. Lei Tai ignored the finger, pulling him closer. The dust from my slippers. Is it settling on the Han Dynasty records? Lin Rue laughed, setting down his brush. He turned in Lei Tai's arms, looping his hands behind the king's neck. I suppose I'll have to forgive you, but only because you brought me the Lulan scrolls. I'll bring you more. There's a kingdom to the west with a library twice the size of Lolan's. And to the south, monasteries with manuscripts no one has ever seen. I will bring you all of them, and you will build me a library that the world remembers. Lin Rue's eyes were soft. A library that the world remembers. That's a tall order. I have faith. Lei Tai looked around the archive, at the organized scrolls, the quiet space that Lin Rue had transformed. You were supposed to be a hostage. Instead, you shushed me and asked for better lighting. Lin Rue grinned. Your boots squeaked. My boots were a national security threat, apparently. They were. But you fixed them. You listened. Lin Rue's expression softened. That's when I knew you were not the monster the story said. That I could make a life here. With you. Lei Tai kissed him, soft and slow. Lin Rue answered in kind, his fingers threading through the king's hair. When they broke apart, Lin Rue turned to his work table and picked up a scroll. I finished it this morning. He unrolled it. It was a history of the Yin Federation, from its founding to the present. The characters were elegant, precise. And at the end, where the history should have stopped, there was a blank space. For what comes next, Lin Rue said. For the new kingdom we build together. For our story. Lei Tai took the brush from his hand and, in his own unsteady hand, wrote two characters in the blank space. Our dynasty. Lin Rue stared at the scroll, his expression bright with happiness. That's not very scholarly. A historian is supposed to be objective. A historian writes what happened. Lei Tai pulled him close. And this is what happened. A librarian fell into a barbarian's arms, and together they built an empire of ink and iron. Lin Rue laughed, the sound like sunlight on old paper. You're impossible. And yet, Lei Tai said, his forehead resting against Lin Rue's, you stay. I stay. Lin Rue kissed him, soft and sure. For the scrolls. For the library. For the kingdom we're building. For you. Outside, the snow began to fall, blanketing the fortress in white. In the great hall, warriors raised their cups to the Iron Thunder and his southern prince. Scholars bent over scrolls in the reading area, lost in the wisdom of ages. And in the quiet of the library, surrounded by the stories of 1,000 years, Lin Rue and Lei Tai held each other, their own story only beginning.